You did what? My voice cracked, sharp as glass. I gripped the edge of the kitchen table, knuckles white, as I stared at Carol. My stomach twisted itself into tight, angry knots that wouldn't unravel. She looked back at me, her eyes cool and steady, as if I'd asked her about the weather. Her perfect, manicured nails tapped a slow beat on her coffee mug. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. I used it for the wedding, she said, each word deliberate, as if we were discussing spare change misplaced in the laundry. Luke needed help with the cost, and it's family money. You'll get over it. Family money. I shot back, my voice rising and echoing against the kitchen walls. That was my money. I worked 2 years waiting tables, every weekend, every holiday to save for college. Carol, you promised me you'd invest it for me. And I did. Now her voice sharpened, a cold edge beneath her calm. I invested it in something important. Your brother's wedding. Her son. Not my brother. Luke had never cared about any of this. He floated above the mess, oblivious, always assuming the world would bend for him. As far as he was concerned, his dream wedding, with its ridiculous country mansion venue, the kind of place I'd only ever seen in magazines, and flower arrangements that probably cost more than my tuition, mattered more than anything I wanted for myself. My chest burned, the anger bitter and hot, but before I could say another word, my father walked in, mug in hand, bleary-eyed from another late night at work. "What's all this yelling about?" he asked, his gaze flickering between us. "Ask Carol," I snapped, unable to keep the tremor from my voice. "She spent my college savings on Luke's wedding. My name's Emma Williams. I'm 19 years old, but sometimes in this house, I feel much younger. Powerless, invisible. Ever since I can remember, my stepmother, Carol, has run our home like it's her private kingdom. My mom died when I was 10. I remember the way she used to sing while she cooked, the way she hugged me so tight I felt safe. When Dad remarried, I just wanted some kind of normal again. A family, laughter, someone who cared. But Carol came first, her and Luke. I was the afterthought, the shadow in the background, never a priority. I got my first job at 16, working at the diner on Main Street. Every tip, every dollar from extra shifts, went straight into my college fund. I wanted to go to the local university and study nursing, just like my mom always hoped for me. Carol loved to talk about being smart with money, about planning for the future. So when she offered to invest my savings, said she could get me a better return than my basic savings account, I believed her. Looking back, I feel so naive. But back then, I just wanted to be included. I just wanted someone to be proud of me. Dad frowned, confusion written all over his face, as Carol breezed past him, already finished with the conversation. She always did that, ended things on her terms. "Why didn't you tell me?" Dad asked, his voice uncertain, eyes searching my face. "I didn't know until now," I said, voice shaking. "She said she'd invest it, but she spent it all on Luke's wedding." He hesitated, swallowing hard. I could see the old familiar fear flicker in his eyes. He hated conflict, and Carol knew it. She'd always used his weakness. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding," he mumbled, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Let me talk to her." "A misunderstanding." My voice nearly broke. "Dad, she admitted it. She doesn't even think she did anything wrong." He didn't answer. Instead, he muttered about needing to get to work and disappeared upstairs, mug forgotten on the counter. I stood in the kitchen, listening to Carol's footsteps fading down the hallway, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me. She'd stolen my future, and my father was too weak to stand up for me. I'd always known I couldn't count on Carol for kindness, but this was something else. This was theft. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. My anger churned into something deeper, colder, a resolve I didn't know I had. For so long I'd been afraid to speak up, afraid to upset the fragile balance at home. But now I saw it for what it was, control. Carol had always made the rules. She'd taken what she wanted, and expected everyone else to be grateful. Not this time. That money was mine. If Dad wouldn't fight for me, I'd fight for myself. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I went to the library. My hands shook as I scanned the bulletin board for help. Anyone who could tell me what to do. I found a flyer. Know your rights. Free legal consultation. I took a deep breath and called the number. I need to know if there's anything I can do, I told the lawyer, my voice raw. It was my savings. I worked for it. My stepmother used it without my permission. Can I get it back? Possibly, he said, his voice calm, reassuring. If you can prove the money was yours, and that she used it without your consent, you have a case. But it won't be easy. Are you prepared to take this to court? I hesitated, suddenly aware of the enormity of what I was considering. Taking my stepmother to court would tear open every wound, every secret. It would mean exposing Carol and maybe even my father for what they'd allowed. But what other choice did I have? Carol wasn't about to admit she was wrong, and Dad would never stand up to her. If I didn't fight for myself, no one would. Yes, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm ready. Telling Dad about the lawsuit was worse than I imagined. He looked at me like I'd grown a second head, his face crumpling in disbelief. Emma, do you really want to do this? He paced the living room, wringing his hands. It's just going to cause more tension in the family. She already caused tension, I said, my anger breaking free. Dad, she stole from me. This isn't about family. It's about what's right. He slumped onto the couch, silent for a long moment. I watched the hope flicker in his eyes, hoping he'd finally find his voice, that he'd tell me I was right, that he'd help me. But then Carol walked in, lips pursed, eyes hard as diamonds. So what's the plan, Emma? She sneered. You're going to drag your family through the mud over a few thousand? Real mature. It's not just a few thousand, I replied, and this time my voice didn't shake. It's my future. You don't get to take that from me. She smirked, tilting her head as if I was some amusing child. Do what you have to, sweetheart. You won't win. That was it. The line was drawn. Carol thought she could intimidate me into silence, into submission, the same way she always had. But she didn't know how much I'd already lost, how much I was willing to risk to get it back. With the lawyer's help, I filed the lawsuit. I spent hours at the library after school, combing through old bank statements, pay stubs, anything to prove that money was mine. I dug up emails, text messages, every scrap of proof that I had saved, that I had trusted Carol, and that she had betrayed me. Each piece of evidence felt like a small act of reclaiming myself. It wasn't just about the $8,000 anymore. It was about standing up and saying, you don't get to decide what I'm worth. For years, I'd let Carol's voice drown out my own, let her rules shape my life. Now I was finally speaking up. Carol hadn't only stolen my savings, she'd stolen my trust, my sense of belonging, my hope for the future. I was determined to get all of it back. Filing the lawsuit against Carol felt like stepping onto shaky ground, the kind that might collapse beneath my feet at any moment. I wasn't just taking on my stepmother, I was fighting for myself, maybe for the first time. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing. I wasn't alone anymore. I had my truth, and for the first time I was ready to fight for it. Taking on the mess in my family felt like walking a tightrope strung over a canyon, every step threatening disaster. Since the day I confronted Carol, my dad had barely looked at me. He'd retreat into his workshop as soon as I came home, tinkering with old radios and broken lamps as if he could fix our family by soldering wires. The silence between us grew thick, stretching out through the house, making every evening feel colder. Carol, on the other hand, made a game of making my life as miserable as possible. She left pointed notes on the fridge, sharp little reminders that she still had the upper hand. Maybe save up again. Third time's the charm, she'd scrawl, the ink pressed so hard it nearly bled through the paper. Any time we crossed paths, she'd toss out a sneer or a nasty comment, just loud enough for Dad to overhear and ignore. But no matter how much she tried to push, I refused to let her see me falter. I planted my feet, determined that if anyone was going to blink first, it wouldn't be me. The court date hung over my head like a storm cloud, 3 months away. Just enough time to prepare, but more than enough time for the anxiety to fester. My lawyer, Mr. Peterson, was a steadying presence. He was calm, methodical, and spoke with the confidence of someone who'd spent half his life navigating the choppy waters of small claims court. His office was lined with worn law books and faded certificates, and he always wore the same navy suit, as though he didn't want his clothes to distract from the facts. "We'll need more than just your word," he told me, flipping through the mess of paperwork I'd brought. His voice was gentle but firm, like a teacher guiding a student. "You have to show the money was yours, and that Carol took it without your permission. Any records? Written agreements?" "I have my bank statements," I said, sliding the folder across his desk. "And I wrote her a note when I gave her the money, asking her to invest it for me. It's not a formal contract, but it's something, right?" He nodded, glancing over the note. "It's a start. I'll subpoena her financial records. If she spent it on the wedding or anything else, it'll show up in the accounts." Those weeks before the trial crawled by. My dad barely spoke, and when he did, it was only to question my choices. The distance between us felt insurmountable, but the worst part was knowing he wanted things to go back to the way they were, before all the lies. One night, he appeared in my doorway, silhouetted by the hallway light, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "Emma, do you really want to go through with this?" he asked quietly, as if afraid Carol might overhear. "Carol's furious. You know how she gets." My hands froze above my laptop keyboard. "She's furious because she got caught," I said, voice flat. "And yes, Dad, I'm doing this. She stole from me." He let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his temples as if trying to erase a headache that had lived there for years. I don't want this to tear the family apart." I finally looked up, frustration simmering in my chest. "She already tore it apart, Dad. The day she decided I didn't matter. I'm not the one breaking things. She is." He didn't answer. He just stood there for a moment, as if searching for words that wouldn't come, then turned and walked away. The sound of his retreating footsteps felt like a door closing. Home became a battlefield, quiet but tense like the air before lightning strikes. The only real comfort I had was my friends, who refused to let me drown in self-doubt. They texted me reminders to eat, took me out for coffee, and let me vent without judgment. "You're doing the right thing," my best friend Lily said one night as we sat in the corner booth of our favorite diner, nursing mugs of coffee gone cold. "She had no right to take your money. If you don't stand up for yourself now, when will you?" I hesitated, staring into the swirl of cream in my cup. "But what if I lose? What if the court sides with her? I'll look like a fool, and I'll still be out $8,000. Lily reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You won't lose. You've worked too hard for this. And even if you don't win, you're standing up for yourself. That counts for more than you think." Her words lingered in my mind during the sleepless nights. I realized it was no longer just about the money. It was about reclaiming my voice. Proving to myself and everyone else that I mattered, that I wouldn't let anyone silence me. As the trial date crept closer, Mr. Peterson uncovered something huge. In the financial records he'd subpoenaed, he found patterns, large withdrawals from a joint account Carol shared with Dad. It wasn't just my savings that had vanished. Carol had been quietly siphoning money from Dad's accounts, spending it on luxury items and lavish trips for years. He'd had no idea. "This changes things," Mr. Peterson said during our last meeting before the hearing, his tone more serious than I'd ever heard. "It's not just about your savings anymore. If we present this, we'll expose a pattern of financial mismanagement. The judge will see it's deliberate, not a mistake." The discovery left me shaken. I'd always known Carol put herself first, but this was betrayal on a whole new level. I spent hours wrestling with what to do. Bringing this up in court would help my case, but it would destroy my dad's trust, and maybe his sense of reality. Was I willing to break his heart for the sake of the truth? The night before the hearing, Lily came over and found me staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. "I don't know if I can do this to him," I admitted, voice trembling. "It's going to break him." Lily sat beside me, her presence grounding. "He deserves to know, Emma. He's been living in her shadow for years, letting her run the show. Maybe this is what he needs to finally wake up." As dawn crept in, I realized Lily was right. The truth might hurt, but pretending wouldn't heal anything. I owed it to myself, and maybe even to Dad, to let the truth come out. The morning of the trial, I felt the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. My hands shook as I buttoned my shirt. When we arrived at the courthouse, Carol was already there, looking immaculate. Her hair was perfectly styled, her jewelry sparkling under the harsh lights. She sat with her lawyer, whispering and laughing as if she didn't have a care in the world. My dad sat beside her, his face drawn and pale. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. He wouldn't meet my eyes. When the judge entered, the courtroom hushed. I forced myself to focus on Mr. Peterson's calm voice as he laid out our evidence. My bank statements, the note I'd given Carol, and finally, the records showing her extravagant spending habits. Every word felt like a stone dropping into a still pond. "The evidence is clear," Mr. Peterson told the court, his voice steady. "The defendant used my client's savings without consent, prioritizing her own desires over her stepdaughter's future. But, Your Honor, there's more. A pattern emerges. Funds withdrawn from joint accounts, spent on luxury items and vacations. This isn't a one-time mistake. It's a calculated abuse of trust." Carol's lawyer tried to twist the story, insisting I'd willingly handed over the money. But then Mr. Peterson presented the financial records. The room went silent as the details spilled out. Withdrawals, purchases, vacations. My stomach twisted as I glanced at my father. His face turned the color of ash. He leaned back in his chair, his shoulders caving in as if the truth itself was too heavy to bear. It was as if he'd been punched in the gut. In that moment, I saw the cost of silence and secrets, the way they erode trust, fracture families, and leave us all standing on different sides of an unbridgeable gap. But I also saw something else. The power of standing up, even when your knees are shaking, even when you're terrified of what the truth will bring. As the judge called for a recess, I realized that no matter how this ended, I'd reclaimed something that could never be stolen again. My sense of worth. His eyes were wide, disbelief etched deep into every line of his face. For a moment, even Carol, who always seemed so unflappable, looked genuinely rattled. Her mask slipping just enough to reveal the uncertainty beneath. When my turn finally arrived, I rose from my chair, every muscle tense, and met the judge's gaze head-on. My voice was steady despite the tightness in my throat, somewhere between fear and resolve. "That money was my future," I began, each word measured, deliberate. I trusted Carol to help me grow it, to look out for my interests. Instead, she took it for herself. This isn't just about the $8,000, it's about trust, about the principle behind it. I deserve justice. I deserve to be heard. As I sat back down, a surge of determination rushed through me, stronger than fear or anger. I realized I was no longer just fighting for lost money, but for my right to be treated with respect. No matter the outcome, I'd spoken my truth in front of everyone who mattered, refusing to let my voice be drowned out by excuses or manipulation. The air in the courtroom felt electric, heavy with anticipation and the gravity of what was at stake. The judge leaned forward, scanning the thick file of bank statements, emails, and affidavits my lawyer had assembled, a tangible record of years I could never get back. Every page seemed to weigh on the room, the truth pressing down. Carol had siphoned money from my father's accounts for years, hiding behind complicated explanations and family obligations. Today, the reality was laid bare, and for the first time, she looked genuinely uncomfortable. Her usual smug composure replaced by a brittle, anxious tightness around her mouth. My father, sitting beside her, looked utterly broken, as if each new revelation chipped away at whatever illusions he'd clung to. "Mrs. Williams," the judge said, her tone slicing through the tension like a blade. "The evidence demonstrates you used Miss Williams's savings without her consent. You claim you acted in the family's interest, but the records show otherwise. There's a consistent pattern here. Withdrawals from joint accounts, unexplained expenses. This goes far beyond a simple misunderstanding." Carol's lawyer jumped in, desperate to reframe the story. She rambled about family dynamics, about the messy realities of shared finances and blurred boundaries. But the judge barely listened. She held up the documents for all to see, her voice unwavering. "This is not a case of poor communication or accidental errors. This is a breach of trust, plain and simple." I glanced at my father. He sat rigid, face drained of color, his eyes unblinking as he stared ahead. It was as if each piece of evidence cut a little deeper, forcing him to confront the reality he'd ignored for so long. I wondered if he was finally seeing Carol as she truly was, or if he was simply seeing his own failure. When it was Carol's turn to speak, she tried to collect herself, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "Your Honor," she began, her voice carefully modulated, "this entire situation has been blown out of proportion. I only used Emma's savings because I believed it would help the family. My son's wedding was a major event." The judge cut her off, voice sharp and cold. "You spent $8,000 of Miss Williams's money on your son's wedding and called it an investment for her future? The records show you withdrew even more, spending on personal luxuries. Do you expect us to believe this was for anyone's benefit but your own?" Carol faltered, her rehearsed serenity unraveling. I didn't mean for it to." "Enough." The judge's voice was final, echoing off the wood panels. "This case is about more than a sum of money. It's about accountability. Your actions reveal a pattern of selfishness, of prioritizing your wants over the trust placed in you." My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone could hear it. I hadn't allowed myself to hope for vindication. Not really. But as the judge spoke, it suddenly felt possible, almost within reach. When her decision finally came, it was like sunlight breaking through a storm. "In light of the overwhelming evidence, I rule in favor of the plaintiff, Miss Williams," the judge announced. "Mrs. Williams is ordered to repay the $8,000 in full, with interest within 60 days. Additionally, I recommend a comprehensive review of the defendant's financial management to ensure there have been no further abuses." The silence was deafening. Carol's face turned to stone, her lips pressed into a hard, thin line. She looked at me with something like hatred, but it had lost its power. My father buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking, not with anger, but with a deep, exhausted grief. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming, almost dizzying. The victory wasn't just in the restitution, it was in being recognized, in having my reality acknowledged. I was no longer dismissed as a dramatic, ungrateful daughter. I had been wronged, and now the truth was out for everyone to see. As we filed out of the courtroom, Carol caught up to me, her voice a low, venomous hiss. "You'll regret this, Emma." For once, I didn't flinch. The fear she used to inspire was gone, replaced by a sense of clarity and strength I hadn't known I possessed. "No, Carol," I replied, holding her gaze, refusing to look away. "You'll regret underestimating me." In the hallway, my father approached, looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen him. He seemed to struggle for words, guilt and regret etched deep in his features. "Emma," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I swear I didn't know. I never realized she was." I stopped him gently, not out of anger but out of honesty. "You didn't want to know, Dad. It was easier to pretend everything was fine than to face what was really happening. But now you see what happens when you look away." He nodded, eyes shining with unshed tears. "You're right. I failed you and I'm sorry." It wasn't the grand apology I'd once dreamed of, the kind that would undo years of neglect and denial. But it was real, it was more than I'd ever gotten before. For the first time I saw him as a man caught in his own web of weakness, not just a passive bystander. I didn't forgive him, not fully, but I felt something shift inside, A slow, unexpected kind of closure. Stepping outside, the sunlight felt different. Warmer, brighter, as if the world was opening up again after a long, gray winter. The weight I'd carried for so long began to lift, replaced by a quiet pride. I'd fought for myself and I'd won. Carol's lies were no longer secrets, and my father's blind loyalty had finally cracked. As I checked my phone, a message from Lily blinked on the screen. "You did it. Drink on me tonight." I smiled, my reply immediate. Absolutely. This wasn't just about the money. It was about finally reclaiming my life, about proving to myself that I could stand up, be heard, and survive the fallout. I walked away from the courthouse a little taller, each step a promise to myself that I would never let anyone silence me again. Standing up for myself was something I'd always imagined doing, but when I finally did, when I demanded what I deserved and the verdict actually landed in my favor, it felt almost surreal, as if the universe had tilted for just a moment to acknowledge my struggle. Those first days after the trial drifted past in a daze. I kept checking my bank account, half convinced the $8,000 would vanish again, but each time it was still there, proof that persistence and courage could change things. Carol's reaction, though, left a strange tension hanging in the air. She returned to the house in a heavy, silent fog, barely glancing at me or my dad. It was unnerving to see her so subdued, after years of her dominating every conversation, dictating every plan, making her presence felt in every room. Now she moved through the house like a shadow, simmering with barely disguised resentment, but for once she wasn't the one in control. That shift felt monumental, almost exhilarating. I clung to it in moments of doubt, reminding myself that I had finally broken free of her grip, at least in this one crucial way. My dad, on the other hand, seemed adrift, more lost than I'd ever seen him. One night I found him sitting alone in the living room, a stack of Carol's financial documents from the trial scattered around him. It was as if he was searching for some hidden answer in the numbers, something that could explain how things had turned out this way. "She lied to me," he murmured, his voice barely rising above a whisper, as if he was confessing a secret to the empty room. "All these years and I didn't see it." I hesitated, unsure how to respond, then sat down across from him, feeling the weight of everything unsaid between us. Finally I managed. "You trusted her, Dad. That's not a weakness. But pretending not to see what she was doing, that's what hurt. That's what let it go on so long." He looked up at me, eyes dark with regret and something like shame. "I should have protected you," he said quietly. "I should have listened when you tried to tell me." For a moment I wanted to lash out, to tell him just how much his silence had cost me, how alone I'd felt, how invisible. But I could see he already knew, that he was carrying that guilt now. So I just nodded. "You still can, Dad. Things can be different if you want them to be." A week later, Carol packed her things and left, her departure as cold and abrupt as everything else she did. She left behind a terse note on the kitchen counter. "I'll let you know where to send my things." There was no apology, no attempt at explanation. Just her usual entitlement, now stripped of its audience. My dad said little about her leaving. Maybe he didn't have the words, or maybe he was still processing the reality of her betrayal. But the shift in the house was immediate and profound. Suddenly there was a quiet that felt peaceful, not oppressive. For the first time in years, I didn't have to keep my guard up or tiptoe around my own home. Even the air felt lighter, as if we'd both been holding our breath for too long. Luke, unsurprisingly, kept his distance. Whether he was wrestling with the truth about his mom or simply refusing to acknowledge it, I never received an apology or even a conversation from him. Part of me longed for closure, for some acknowledgement that I hadn't imagined the injustice, but another part realized I didn't need it. I'd fought the battle that mattered and won. Their approval, their explanations, had lost their power over me. With Carol gone and the money finally secure, I threw myself into college planning. The $8,000 wasn't just money, it was opportunity, validation, and freedom all at once. It was proof that I could take control of my own life, that I didn't have to let other people's choices define my future. I spent hours researching programs, comparing costs, mapping out ways to stretch every dollar to its limit. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of hope blooming inside me, tentative at first, then growing stronger. There were moments, late at night, when excitement would bubble up unexpectedly, imagining new classes, new friends, a future that finally felt like mine. My dad noticed the change in me, and one evening as I sat surrounded by college applications and brochures, he quietly offered to help. "I can't undo what happened," he said, his voice gentle, "but I want to support you however I can." I hesitated, old wounds making me wary, but something in his tone told me he was sincere. He was trying, and in that moment it mattered more than I expected. "Thank you, Dad," I said, realizing I meant it. Maybe forgiveness wasn't immediate, but trust could be rebuilt, slowly, with effort. In the quiet spaces between all the planning and uncertainty, I reflected on what the trial had taught me. It hadn't just exposed Carol's manipulations or my dad's failings. It had revealed something in me I hadn't known existed. I'd always thought of myself as the peacemaker, the one who kept her head down to avoid conflict, but standing up to Carol had forced me to discover my own strength. I realized I was more than the girl who worked late shifts or the overlooked stepdaughter. I was someone capable of fighting for what she deserved, someone whose voice mattered. That realization changed how I saw myself. It was a kind of freedom I'd never experienced before. A few months later, I found myself standing outside my new dorm building, staring up at the red brick and bustling crowds. College felt like another world, one I'd barely dared to hope for during the worst moments at home. My dad insisted on helping me move in, and I let him, even though he fussed over every box and apologized every time he bumped into someone in the hallway. For once, his nervous energy felt sincere, almost endearing. It was real, and I could see that he was trying to be present, to make up for lost time. "Are you sure you don't need anything else?" he asked for what felt like the 10th time, hovering in the doorway. I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't expected. "I'm good, Dad. Really. Thanks for everything." He paused, searching my face, and then said, "I'm proud of you, Emma. You worked so hard for this." The words hit me harder than I'd imagined they would. They didn't erase the past, but they softened it, made it possible to believe in new beginnings. For a moment I let myself feel proud too. As I settled into life at college, everything felt charged with new possibility. Every class, every late-night conversation, even the textbooks I'd bought with my own money felt like small victories. Each one was a step away from the chaos and pain of the past and toward a future I was building for myself. Sometimes I'd open a book and just hold it, quietly marveling at the fact that I had gotten here on my own. Pride would well up inside me, fierce and unexpected. This was my achievement. No one could take it from me. Back home, life settled into a new, quieter rhythm. Carol's absence lingered at first like an echo, but gradually the house became a place of healing. My dad and I weren't as close as I hoped, but the distance between us was shrinking. He called every Sunday, sometimes just to ask how my classes were going, sometimes just to hear my voice. I appreciated those calls more than I let on. They were proof that, while the past couldn't be changed, the future could be different. As for Carol and Luke, they faded into the periphery of my life. Their importance shrank with each passing week, until they became little more than names in an old chapter. I didn't need their validation, their apologies, or their explanations anymore. I already had what I needed. My independence, my sense of self, and the belief that I could shape my own destiny. One weekend, Lily, my best friend who'd stood by me through it all, came to visit. We found a bench near campus, coffee cups in hand, and laughed about the absurdities of dorm life. The midnight fire alarms, the communal bathrooms, the endless stream of new faces. In that moment, surrounded by possibility and friendship, I realized just how far I'd come. The scars from the past hadn't disappeared, but they no longer defined me. I was free, finally, to become the person I wanted to be. "You're killing it, Emma," she said, bumping my shoulder with a grin that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in ages. After everything that had happened, the disappointments, the late-night tears, the constant second-guessing, I was still here. And not just here, but thriving in ways I never thought possible. Her words echoed in my mind long after she walked away, settling over me like a warm blanket. I realized how much I had let the opinions of others shape the way I saw myself. Carol's constant eye rolls that made me shrink a little smaller each time, my dad's heavy silences that spoke louder than any words, even Luke's indifference that left me questioning if I was ever enough. For so long I let those moments define my worth. But tonight, for the first time, I could feel a shift. I wasn't standing in anyone's shadow anymore. I was finally stepping forward, clearing my own path through the tangle of doubts and expectations. That realization felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater for too long. I could actually feel the excitement humming in my veins, a sense that life was opening up before me, full of possibilities I'd never let myself hope for. Walking back to my dorm that evening, the campus came alive with a new kind of energy. Laughter spilled out from open windows, the glow of streetlights danced on the pavement, and I felt strangely connected to all of it. I thought back to who I was just a year ago, a girl who kept her head down, afraid to raise her voice or take up space. I remembered how easily I'd said sorry for things that weren't my fault, how I'd let my dreams gather dust in the corners of my mind because I was too scared to reach for them. But that timid version of me felt like a distant memory now. In her place was someone stronger, more confident, willing to take risks and speak her truth. I could see how much I'd grown, how the struggles had shaped me rather than defeated me. For the first time, I felt proud of the person I was becoming. It wasn't just the end of one difficult chapter. It was the beginning of something entirely new, something I got to create for myself. My life was finally in my hands, and for the first time I was excited, genuinely excited, to see where it would lead. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was ready to truly live on my own terms.